This video will give you a basic rundown of Slingshot clutches and the basic maintenance procedures for either one. Before we start, I want to state that this is how we have always done our clutch maintenance. If you have a different method or frequency that works for you, then stick with it. We are making this video to help everyone, especially those new to the Slingshot community. Okay, first of all, let's go over the types of clutches. Over here, we have the Speedway Entertainment 4-shoe clutch. This is probably the most commonly used clutch you will see. It is only available from Speedway Entertainment. Here is the Norm 1800 3-shoe clutch. If you're moving up from go-karts, this clutch probably looks familiar to you. The obvious differences are the size of the drum, the 4-shoe, the Norm, and the number of shoes, obviously. The Norm has the 3 shoes mounted directly to the carrier. The 4-shoe clutch has 2 shoes on one carrier, 2 shoes on another. And also, the other difference is a minor difference is the mandrel. The mandrel on the Norm has a much smaller surface here, fits right into the carrier. The mandrel on the 4-shoe Speedway Entertainment clutch, much larger surface, fits in like that. We have used both clutches with the same results. We have not found an advantage to using one over the other. The maintenance procedures for each one are the same. So if your car is equipped with either of these, just follow the guidelines and you should not have a problem. Today we will be performing basic maintenance on a Speedway Entertainment 4-shoe clutch. Let's go over the parts and pieces of the clutch. We have the drum. The drum provides a surface for the clutch shoes to engage. We have the gear. Only a 10-tooth clutch sprocket is allowed, and the gear attaches with screws on the inside of the drum. We have bearings. There are 2 bearings, an outer and an inner. The next part we have are the shoes. These shoes are already connected and ready to assemble. They have the springs attached. They're connected to the shoe carrier. But to separately do it, you have 4 shoes with the Speedway Entertainment clutch. You can see the lining material. The lining material actually makes the contact with the drum. Then you have the springs. On the 4-shoe clutch there are 4 springs. Red is the most common color. There are different engagement rates. That's something you need to experiment with. Do not mix and match. If you're using red, use all red. You have the shoe carrier. This shoe carrier has the washer built in. This is a spacer washer. If you do not have this type of carrier, you're going to need 2 of these. But as you can see, the carrier has a place for the clutch shoes to fit over it. There's also a keyway inside that fits on the crankshaft. That is how the shoes spin. When the crankshaft obviously spins, the shoes are spinning. Then you have mandrels. There's a long and a short mandrel. The long mandrel is designed to be used with the cranksaver, but it can be used with or without it. So if you have nothing but long mandrels, it's okay. You don't need to have the cranksaver. You can just use a long mandrel. One quick note about the cranksaver. In our opinion, this is one of the best devices to invest in. If you don't have one and you race on a track that can get rough, you need to get one. On top of the mandrel a felt washer goes. This felt washer acts as somewhat of a seal between the bearings and the drum so that grease does not get out onto the surface of the drum. You have a split ring washer. The split ring washer attaches in this groove so that the clutch remains intact. If you have a long mandrel with a cranksaver, you need 2 split ring washers. You have a spacer. This spacer has a chamfered or beveled edge. This beveled edge goes against the crank seal first. That's the first thing that you put on when you are reinstalling the clutch. As I said before, you have washers. There are 2 washers required if you do not have a washer built into the shoe carrier. Then we have the clutch bolts. Use grade 8 3/8 fine thread with a long mandrel or cranksaver mandrel. You need a 3-inch. With the short mandrel, you need a 2.5-inch, but always use grade 8. And then a lock washer to go on the bolt. Alright, let's go over the tools needed for basic clutch maintenance. First off, a 30mm socket with a breaker bar or ratchet. A 9/16" wrench or socket. External split ring pliers. A wire brush. Sandpaper. The grit is your preference. I use 300 to 400 grit. Brake clean and high-speed bearing grease. Here we have an engine mounted to the dyno in the reverse position for visual clarity. As you can see, we have the clutch without the chain installed. The procedure is basically the same if the engine was in the car. The first step is to loosen the engine mounting bolts. 4 of them. Then loosen the muffler clamp. Slacken the chain. You do not have to remove the chain if you don't want to. Place the 30mm socket on the flywheel retaining nut. Have someone hold the breaker bar, or in most cases the breaker bar will come up against the frame or swing arm when you loosen the clutch bolt. Now loosen and remove the clutch bolt. And remove the clutch. Now it's time to move on to actually performing the maintenance on the clutch. Now let's disassemble the clutch. The shoes and the carriers can be placed aside. You want to remove the split ring. Set that aside. Now you should have 3 groups separating the clutch: the drum, the mandrel, and the shoes and carriers. Now you can inspect the drum. Look for severe nicks and damage to the inside and the outside of the drum. Check the gear for missing or cracked teeth. Here's an example of a gear with a missing tooth. It's not going to do you much good. Check the bearings to make sure that they are intact. Check the gear retaining bolts and see if there are any missing. I usually try and tighten them up while I have the clutch apart. Inspect the mandrel. Make sure the felt washer is intact. Replace it if necessary. Now inspect the shoes, the springs, and the carriers. If the shoes are missing any lining, such as these are, then have new linings installed. Here's a side-by-side comparison. This one's been raced hard. This is a brand new lining that was just installed. Now let's perform the clutch maintenance. Now that you have the clutch out and separated, it's time to get down to business and actually perform the clutch maintenance. Let's do the clutch drum maintenance first. Take a strip of sandpaper and scuff the inside of the drum. All you're doing is ensuring that there's no grease or oil on the surface, and you're scuffing the surface so that when the clutch shoes engage, the surface is clean and free of debris. Clean the drum with brake clean. I always use some compressed air just to assure that I get all the debris off of the surfaces. Once the drum is clean and dry, you can lubricate the bearings inside the gear. I just use my finger, a little bit of grease on there, a very small amount, because you don't want a lot of grease coming off and contaminating the inside of the drum. It will cause the clutch to slip. You want just enough grease to assure the bearings will remain lubricated until the next time you perform your clutch maintenance. At this point, the clutch drum is complete and you can set it aside on a clean rag. Let's move on to the clutch shoes. I leave the shoes on the carrier with the springs installed. You need to decide how often you will replace your clutch springs. Place the shoes and carriers in a vise so that you'll be able to work and clean the linings. I use a wire brush and I just simply scratch the linings lengthwise. You're going to see a lot of dust and dirt removed. It doesn't take a long time, a few short strokes, and the surface is clean. Do all of your clutch shoes, then clean them with brake clean and with some compressed air. Set them aside on a clean rag along with the clutch drum. Place the mandrel in a vise with the shaft sticking up, such as this. Use a strip of sandpaper and clean the surface of the mandrel where the bearings make contact. A few minutes is all you need to clean the surface. Clean it with some brake clean and place it with the other parts. With the maintenance complete, let's reinstall the clutch. Before reinstalling the clutch, it's a good idea to check the condition of the end of the crankshaft. Look for burrs and nicks. I usually just clean the surface with some sandpaper just to knock off the debris. Make sure that the keyway is clear and not nicked up. First step is to place the spacer onto the crankshaft. Remember, the beveled edge goes towards the engine. Unless you have the clutch carriers with the built-in spacers, now you would have to put on one of the spacer washers. Install one set of clutch shoes. It is very important to note the orientation of the clutch shoes. The non-pointed portion. This is the non-pointed portion. This is the pointed portion. The non-pointed portion is the leading edge. If it is installed improperly, the clutch will vibrate abnormally and will have to be removed and reinstalled. Orientate the keyway. And install it. Then install the second set of clutch shoes. Remember the leading edge warning. you can see there is a space created by the washer or the built-in spacer between the sets of clutch shoes and the carriers. Now it's time to install the drum and the mandrel. Install the mandrel into the drum. Be sure the felt washer is on the mandrel. Note, some installations may require a washer on the end of the mandrel before the next step. Install the split ring washer. Install the drum over the clutch shoes. As you can see, if it's properly seated, it will remain there without you having to hold it. Install the lock washer onto the clutch bolt and tighten it to 45 foot-pounds. I always use a new clutch bolt and grade 8. It's cheap insurance. Reinstall the chain, tighten the engine mounting bolts, tighten the muffler clamp, check your chain tension, and the installation is complete. Our clutch maintenance interval was usually once every 3 races, but depending on conditions, you may need to adjust your interval. Remember that without a clutch, you're done for the night. Some of the spare parts that I always kept on hand: number 1 was a complete spare clutch. Some other ideas for spare parts is a spare clutch drum with a gear installed, spare gear retaining bolts, a spare gear with bearings, spare clutch shoes installed on the carriers already with springs, spare split ring washers, spare clutch bolts. These are things that you're always going to need at the track. If you don't have them, you're out of luck for the night. I want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you at the track.